So the plan when I come back, there's a lot of cool things that are going to be going on. In the short run, I'm going to do a lot of sleeping because I'm totally exhausted from this leg of traveling. Ever since Japan, it's just been kind of constant, nonstop. So my body's pretty shot. I need a solid couple of weeks of just sleeping. But I have a couple of cool things coming up just in the next few months. I was planning on my next book, philosophy, being a book about metaphysics. It's going to be called The Mind and the World, and I've already got some of the stuff laid out, and it's covering what I want to cover, how I want to cover it. But I think I'm actually going to do a shorter book in the meantime, because that one's going to take a little while to write. It's going to be a book resolving the liar's paradox. I've had some good conversations with people, and I've got a 3-minute video on YouTube that's not super in depth or anything. It's like 3 minutes long. I have a little bit covered in Square One, but I want to give it a full proper treatment, resolution to the liar's paradox. So all the different variations and all that, and I think that could be a good. It's not going to take that long. I've already got a lot of it sorted out. So that'll be a short, and obviously you guys will get that free for being Patreon supporters. I also have, just as like a business in helping the world in a more immediately practical way, I'm going to be doing a course like on Coursera or Udemy for writing. It's going to be how to communicate clearly. It's not going to be how to impress people by writing, how to write a bunch of poetry, how to waste everybody's time. It's going to be how to communicate nonfiction in a crystal clear way, how to take big ideas and distill them into something that anybody can understand. Since I've been doing this for a little while and people seem to like my ability to do it, I'm gonna put a course together for that. Because if you look at Coursera right now, or writing courses, you'll notice a lot of them are all BS. It's like how to write to impress people, how to write things that go over other people's heads and that make you feel smart. I don't want to deal with any of that nonsense. So that's going to be on the list. I also have some upcoming interviews that I'm pretty excited about. I can't tell you much about them, but both interviews, I'll be on both sides of the mic that I'm looking forward to. So that's hopefully going to be in the next few months. I got bigger plans after that, but that's kind of the short term. All right, so how do you think the non-physical and physical interact? That's a very difficult question, and the honest answer is I don't know. And I'm still working on this. Here's the way I would like to approach it. There's kind of a more fundamental question, which is why would one believe in the non-physical, the existence of something non-physical? My answer to that is, if you guys haven't read a piece I wrote called The Case Against Physicalism, you can read that. But I essentially say that there are experiences, there's data that we can gather, which is not satisfactorily explained by the theory of physicalism. So I'm a non-physicalist. I'm a reluctant dualist. Kind of wish I weren't, but I think there is more existent phenomena than just physically existent phenomena. And the reason for that is if you think about the nature of your experiences, for example, you become aware of your visual field. Right over there's a red bag over there. And if I think about the actual sensory experience of redness, it doesn't seem like I'm talking about something that is itself physical or spatially extended. It's not made up of atoms. It's experience. So what is experience? There seems to be this first-person type of existence that is in the world that's out there. And in a sense, it's even more fundamental than our experience of the physical world, what we assume to be the physical world. So in that respect, I have reason to believe that non-physical stuff exists, and I'm guessing the physical stuff exists. And from my experiences, I'm also guessing that there's a two-way interaction between the two. So when I'm seeing the red bag, I think it's out there impressing on my senses. That's why I have the phenomena. But I also think I can make mental decisions to move the red bag around in space. So there seems to be two-way causality between physical phenomena and mental phenomena. What exactly that connection is, I don't know. It's a really difficult question. Descartes said it had to do something with the pineal gland. I mean, maybe not. I don't know. I don't have a great resolution to that. All that I can say very confidently is that I think physicalism in its strictest form is false. Okay. Next question. Hi, Steve. Hope you're well. I was reading through some of the comments on the patrons' Facebook group about DMT and psychedelic experience. I'm currently writing my senior thesis for undergrad, trying to draw metaphysical significance out of DMT experiences and mystical experience in general, and I was wondering if you have any thoughts on this. I do have a lot of thoughts on this, but I really haven't shared them, but I guess I'm going to now. So, this is going to be actually part of the subject indirectly of my upcoming book, The Mind and the World. It's not going to be DMT experiences per se, but it's going to be this. That when we're constructing theories about the world, our experience is, in a sense, primary. Our theories are about our experiences. And we fall into the rationalist dogma. Even though I am a rationalist, there's a strain of dogmatism that comes with rationalism, which is that when the data doesn't conform to the theory, you throw out the data. Sometimes that might be legitimate. A lot of times that's not legitimate. And so what people do is when you have these crazy experiences. I haven't had any of these psychedelic experiences. I haven't had any of the hard. The only thing I've tried is marijuana, I guess, and alcohol, and marijuana and alcohol together, which just made me fall asleep. So I haven't had any of these crazy experiences. But I totally acknowledge and believe that people are having these crazy experiences where they feel like they're yanked out of the body and they're going out in outer space and they see all this crazy stuff. It's very easy to just dismiss it and say, "Oh, well, you're just crazy. That's all," and then no more additional explanation required. I find that to be philosophically a methodological error, because you have to explain all of the phenomena of the experience, every last minutia that there is any experience whatsoever. It must have a full and satisfactory explanation. And so, from my research, and from my beliefs in non-physicalism, I think that it would be consistent with a non-physicalist belief to say that if the mind is not fundamentally itself physical, that perhaps when you ingest some of these substances, you have a kind of severing, a temporary severing of that connection between the physical and the mental. And so your mind goes, in some sense, maybe, to some crazy reality that I've never experienced, but a lot of people have, and they say it's very profound. So one of the other things, actually, if you listen to the interview that I did with the World Wanderers just a couple of weeks ago about their ayahuasca experience, one of the really interesting things that I don't have solved, but it leads to some really interesting questions, is it seems like in a lot of these experiences there's learning moments where the people feel like they're gaining additional information about themselves that maybe they couldn't have had, or they didn't feel like they could have had, these deep insights about themselves. And there are two possible explanations for this. If the information they're gathering in their psychedelic experiences are true, and if they're true about themselves, it is one of two things. It is either that they are literally learning from some other entity about themselves, which is a remarkable claim, or they are learning from themselves true information about themselves that they don't consciously have, but yet somehow is stored in their subconscious that then they access, but it doesn't feel like them, which is also very weird. So the idea that in this state you have it's not just a blur of color, it's that you have thoughts and you have metaphysical insights, is totally bonkers. And I have not seen a really great explanation for it, other than saying, yeah, maybe you're having some encounter with more knowledgeable entities than yourself. I know it sounds crazy, but it also sounds crazy to say there's this other part of your mind that exists out there in the ether that you have no access to whatsoever, but it knows more about you than your conscious mind knows of yourself. And when you smoke drugs, there are particular drugs, that other mind, that is you, that you're unaware of, tells you things about yourself that help you heal. I mean, okay, that's possible too. It's pretty stinking crazy. So yeah, the whole area of psychedelic experience, I think is crazy. Somebody says, when are we doing a Patreon group ayahuasca trip? That's no answer. He's got a winky face. I understood. So Satoshi asked, what do you think of the French election? Well, I just made another post about this. I'm mixed about the French election. I'll be super honest with you guys. Marine Le Pen is not a libertarian. She's not conservative by American standards. She is, in a literal sense, not in a dramatic sense, a nationalist socialist. Yes, Nazis were national socialists, okay, but I'm not saying she's a Nazi. I'm saying she is a nationalist and she's a socialist. So I'm sympathetic with the movement that says smash the establishment, get Le Pen in there just to blow shit up. Right? This is kind of the same Trump phenomenon. I'm sympathetic. I understand that idea. And I don't know much about Emmanuel Macron. I mean, it seems like he's more for international free trade, which I think is a good thing, coming from a libertarian standpoint. But I know he's also an establishment guy. Was I think the economics minister of the socialist government, which is not a good sign. I think we are talking about the French election here. So the idea that there's going to be a real libertarian in there, I don't think is plausible. Although from my limited research, Fillon seemed like he was actually pretty libertarian. So I think it's kind of a shame that he didn't get that he's not in this runoff. The whole EU thing is just a total nightmare, and it would be presumptuous of me to say I know what would be better for France or for international politics, but here's my guess. I think in the short run, Le Pen would be worse for France. I think it would be a bad thing because I think she is an extreme authoritarian. In the long run, I think it might be a good thing if Le Pen were to get elected, because there is a developing international order which I am worried about. There's a kind of the EU. I love the idea of free trade and I love the idea of reduced borders for the most part, but the EU has turned into a regulatory, socialist, bureaucratic nightmare that I don't support. It's kind of like the relationship between the states in the United States and the federal government. Like, I'm not a big fan of the federal government, and there's like the EU has turned into the federal government of Europe. I'm not a particularly big fan. So the idea of smashing that establishment, which would definitely happen, I think, after Brexit, and then you have Le Pen gets elected, would be the end. Really, it would be the end of the EU. I think that would be a good thing. I think in the long run that would be a good thing. The trouble is, what emerges when you have a radical smashing of the establishment and a national socialist that rises to power? What emerges from that? I don't know. So it's really a mixed bag, and my guess is that Macron's going to win. So we probably won't see the Frexit, but it's a really interesting circumstance. All right, next question. I think I've heard you speak not in favor of a postmodernist viewpoint. I have been listening to Thaddeus Russell's new podcast, and he seems very sympathetic to postmodernism and has some persuasive arguments for such, but I can't help but think of all the negative attached to it. Wondering what your thoughts are. Is it all bad, some good, or generally good? Excellent question, and my answer is it depends on what you mean by postmodernism. So there is a version of postmodernism which I think is very popular in the States, and people kind of defer to it, and they make a bunch of ridiculous arguments about the non-existence of truth, contradictions exist, everything's relative, everything's a social construction. The metaphysics, if you will, postmodernism and epistemology of postmodernism, I think is totally barren. And if you guys have read my book, Square One, The Foundations of Knowledge, it's would be a partial refutation of this idea of you can't know objective truth. You can know objective truth, you can be certain of it, even if it's a limited amount of objective truth. However, there is another flavor of postmodernism, which I think Thaddeus talks about, which is this idea of a radical individualism, that if lots of things are socially constructed, as I think they are, if lots of gender roles and social expectations are just constructions and you aren't bound by them, then you do have some measure of individual freedom that I, as a libertarian and an individualist, find very attractive. I find the idea of radical individual freedom attractive, and I do think, as far as the metaphysics is concerned, there's quite a lot that is socially constructed. It just doesn't go down into the deep depths of saying that everything is relative. Everything is socially constructed. I watch a clip of Thaddeus on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. He was essentially saying that, and he's also got a couple of interviews with Brett Venant, the School Sucks podcast, where he's essentially making the argument that truth doesn't exist, kind of in a condescending way. But actually, on that note, there may be, I don't know if this is going to be the case, but there may be an upcoming debate between Thaddeus Russell and myself about postmodernism or about this relativism, whether or not there's any such thing as the existence of objective truth. So if that happens, obviously I'll let you guys know. I hope that will happen. But yeah, but specifically to answer your question, is it all bad, some good, or generally good? In practice, I would say it's mostly bad. From my experience in talking to people, coming at it from more of a philosophic standpoint than a political standpoint, I think it's mostly bad. I think it's mostly nonsense, and I think it is fuel for irrationalists to latch on to make a bunch of crummy arguments about how reality is unknowable, and then they import that into their politics and make all kinds of dangerous claims. Okay. Any more questions? We can talk about anything. We're only 24 minutes into it, so I know there are more questions out there, and I'm very, very happy to comment on them. All right, next one came out. Any thoughts on Bill Nye's new show or some recent media attention? It's funny, I just like 2 days ago, while I was nursing my Bangkok belly, I learned about this Bill Nye thing going on. All right. So if you guys are unfamiliar with what's happening with Bill Nye, I guess he released a Netflix show. It's called It's called Bill Nye Saves the World, I think. And I haven't seen it, but I've seen some of the clips. And he does. I mean, everybody that I've talked to who grew up in the '90s loved Bill Nye the Science Guy. It was the best show. Like, I loved it. Everybody loved it. It was great, well produced, a blast. So he comes back, I don't know, 15, 20 years later or whatever, and does this Netflix special. And apparently some of it's very good, some of it's the same style of, like, you know, pop science, exciting stuff. But then he has this segment where he's talking about gender. He's talking about kind of a similar idea about the biology and gender, and there's kind of no such thing as the objective categories of male and female. Everybody's on a spectrum. And he got a ton of shit for this segment. And it even got worse. It's not just that. It's that he brought on some celebrity. I don't know who she is. But to do this song about, I think it's called something like My Sex Junk. And it's this lady who's singing off pitch the most, like, disgusting lyrics about how she's essentially, like, go around, give people sexual stimulation and then feel good about it, and, you know, whore yourself out and everybody should celebrate it. And this is, like, you know, a TV show directed at teenagers, and so there's a ton of outrage. I mean, my perspective is Bill Nye is almost entirely a popularizer of the bad variety, especially nowadays. The amount of confidence with which he speaks and the amount of knowledge which he has, I think, there's this inverse relationship. Especially like when he's talking about climate science, it is 100% subtle, it is as certain as the theory of gravity. No, that is not true. The 95% of climate scientists agree, nonsense. There's an excellent article that I share. I'm actually going to pull it up right now and put it in this feed while I'm talking, because I have it saved. So there is a article I'm going to post right here for you guys. It's by Matt Ridley. It's called What the Climate Wars Did to Science. And it's kind of an expose of some of the legitimate skepticism and controversy and nonsense that's happened in the whole climate world. There is plenty of room for rational skepticism in climate thing. And that's one of his big issues. And I think he's just a total fraud. He's a total fraud, hack, and a sellout. There's many of them in the science community, but he's one of them. But it also is some of his, like, I think he suggested at one point that maybe climate deniers should be locked up, right? So this is kind of standard left-wing blurring of moralism with science and popularity contests and that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm not a particularly big fan at this point, but I highly recommend, if you guys, I'd love to talk about climate skepticism. At some point, I'm going to write a big piece on the topic. But you guys got to check out that Matt Ridley piece. It's really fantastic. All right. Satoshi says, cool name, by the way. Do you think people in power actually believe they're acting for the benefit of the world, or do you think they're acting selfishly and know their actions harm the world? That is a really good and difficult question. And my beliefs on this are changing. For a long time, up until maybe a year or so ago, I had the perspective that in almost all circumstances, the evils, if you will, that we see coming from powerful people, from powerful governments that cause so much misery in the world, is not a function of active malice. It's more like arrogance mixed with presumption, mixed with maybe some good intentions, where people, really think, oh, price controls are going to help, but they end up hurting, they're hurting the economy. And it's like a function of ignorance. And I thought that was a really satisfactory explanation to explain why some of these people cause so much misery, is ignorance. I don't know when it was, maybe a year ago or so. I had some conversations, had some experiences with people closer to power, and my perspective on this has changed. I don't think that there is one secret cabal of people that are planning world events and causing chaos so that they can enslave humanity. I don't think that's correct, of course. But I do think it's the case that there are, in order to get to extremely powerful positions, especially in government, I think you actually have to be a bad person, a really bad person, where you are okay, like Bill Nye, good heavens, he's not this bad. Bill Clinton, for example. I just heard this the other day. Apparently, as the Monica Lewinsky sex scandal was breaking, in order to divert the headlines from the sex scandal, he essentially launched a rocket in some place, I think it was in Africa, and killed some people. I don't think it was intentionally innocent people. I think it was, in the name of humanitarian benefit or whatever. But essentially, to distract people, he launched a missile and killed people because he's playing that's pure politics, smart politics. But you got to be a special type of awful person in order to do that. And I think in order to get to those really high echelons, in government definitely, and maybe even in other powerful establishments, I really think you have to be backstabby and not give much care to many people. It's about how much can you further your career and how much power can you gain. So my perspective on this has actually changed. Even before that, I was kind of the perspective many years ago that maybe there is this group of, as you learn about libertarianism, I think a lot of people have this story where you learn about it and you go, okay, crap, everything that I believed was wrong, everybody was lying to me, and the government does a lot more harm than good, pretty much universally. And so you go down the route of, okay, how deep does this rabbit hole go? How deep do we get into conspiracy theories? How much is this like deliberate propagandizing young people to obey a system that's actually illegitimate? So I went pretty far down that route, and there's definitely truth to be found there, and I don't want to dismiss that. I think that gets prematurely dismissed often, but now I think I'm somewhere in the middle where there really is literal conspiracy going on. There are powerful people getting together trying to preserve their power at the expense of the well-being of people, yes, and I do think there are kind of useful idiots that are in positions of power that have good intentions, maybe low levels of bureaucracy, that are just kind of cogs in the system. Actually, interestingly enough, Tom Sowell is somebody who went to school, I believe it was at the University of Chicago, which was a liberal, a liberal in a classical liberal sense, a free market economic university. I think he even had some training under Milton Friedman. Now, don't quote me on that, but I believe he had a pretty free market education, but he was still a Marxist after he graduated, and he was a Marxist until he worked in government. So even somebody like Tom Sowell, I'm a big fan of, was for a period of time a cog in a machine, causing more harm than good, and then he was experienced in real time to the horrors and the inefficiencies and the nihilism in government, and totally flopped his position. But yeah, I think that it's a mix. I think it's a mix. But I think the closer to power you get, more likely the more selfish and corrupt and sociopathic you get. Okay, next question. I've had the, quote, "but kids need socialization" rebuttal when discussing homeschooling. I know my perspective on this, but I was wondering what your response is to this kind of response. Well, that's a great question. I have lots of experience with this one because I was homeschooled, and growing up all the time, it was actually a running joke in the homeschool community. Like, I don't know how to interact with people. I don't see the sun very much. Like, give me my sunglasses because I never see sunshine. Um, Here's what I have to say about that. I have a few things to say about that, and I have lots of personal experience to share about the whole homeschooling and socialization thing. First of all, it is true to say that there is some portion of homeschoolers that have social ineptitude problems. That is also true of all children, but there might be a higher ratio. I'm not sure if this is the case, but there might be a higher ratio of homeschoolers. I think that's because there is a segment of homeschoolers. Some parents choose to homeschool because their kids have learning disabilities or something like that. So and those people tend to have social problems. So, but not including that, from my experiences, I think homeschoolers are great with socialization skills, with a very big exception. This was definitely the case growing up. This was a long time ago now, but it's probably still the case today. Homeschool kids spend a lot of time around adults, and around a lot of times those adults have high expectations of the kids. There's a lot of nerds in the homeschool community. So their socialization is with a lot more mature people. They have a lot more experience with mature people because they're not stuck in a classroom filled up with 50 other monsters their own age who are all nightmarish and in this authoritarian structure. They have much more freedom and individuality, and I think they mature much more quickly. So what happens is a lot of homeschoolers have a difficult time interacting with other kids their same age who are in public school. I think that's quite frankly because they're much more mature. It's like how sometimes a lot of adults have difficult time interacting with children is because there's a maturity difference. I know I experienced this a lot as a kid growing up. I had no problem socializing with other mature people. A lot of times that was homeschoolers around the same age, even younger or older. But a lot of the people that were in the regular public school system, I did have a difficult time engaging with because they were little savages. Now, I didn't know it at the time, actually. Well, I guess I did a little bit, but I still thought they were cool. I thought the public school kids were cool, and I was like, oh, I want to be more like these people because they're the cool people. Then that didn't last very long, and I realized, oh no, I don't actually want to be like those people. So that's my perspective on socialization. In terms of responding to people's criticism, what I would say at the time, because people would say, shouldn't you be in school? If I was out doing something, why aren't you in school? And I have to say, oh, I'm homeschooled, and then this would open up this dialogue. When I was homeschooled, I got to do a ridiculous amount of extracurricular things. I was out doing stuff all the time. I was doing everything from, dance lessons to martial arts to basketball to artistic stuff to going and seeing museums and sites and doing acting. I was doing stuff all the time, which was awesome, and I loved it. That was some of my best parts of my childhood, just learning stuff, music. So I got socialization constantly. It was just a different type of socialization. So a lot of these people think that what socialization means is being socialized around peers your same age. I don't think that's actually the healthiest type of socialization. I think if you can only interact with people your same age, there's probably a problem there. So yeah, that was my experience. And if you talk to homeschoolers, if adults talk to homeschool kids, a lot of homeschool kids, not just a handful, I think they'll find the same phenomena, that they're perfectly social, they're just more civilized and polite and quieter maybe than your average public school kid. Okay, any other questions? Also, somebody says, read Thomas Sowell, you're correct. I've heard him talk about exactly what you said in interviews. Yes, and if you guys are unfamiliar with Tom Sowell, he's literally my favorite writer. He's one of my favorite thinkers. I think he's wrong in some areas of politics, but he's a magnificent communicator. And some of his videos are like the best videos on YouTube. And it's not like he does YouTube videos like most people do YouTube videos. It's clips of him having conversations with people, having dialogues with people. The man is super badass. And he's got no patience for things that he shouldn't have patience for. And he's also very critical of academia. Of course, I'm very critical of academia as well. One of his book, one of my favorite parts, I think that sums up a lot of the work of Thomas Sowell. But one of his books is called "The Vision of the Anointed," and then the subtitle is "Self-Congratulation as a Basis for Social Policy," something like that. Self-congratulation as a basis for social policy. His point is to say that many people on the left don't actually care about the plight of the poor. I think this is correct. What they care about is social signaling, virtue signaling, making other people think that they're good people. And the way that he would put it is self-congratulation. It's these people patting themselves on the back at the expense of those that they are verbally trying to help. And so he's got this whole theory. He just eviscerates a lot of the arguments and pseudo-intellectualism that I think is on the left. So just Google or YouTube. Do yourself a favor and consume as much Tom Sowell as you can. If you're interested in writing too, all the writers that I respect who have commented about good writing, especially in the libertarian community, everybody raves about Tom Sowell's writing. I know Tom Woods, I think, has said he's one of the best writers that either is in existence, or if you want to learn how to communicate well, read Tom Sowell. I'd say the exact same thing. If I try to model my writing off anybody, it's Tom Sowell. So, and I love his commentary on culture too. I found that very impactful and influential in the way that I think about the world, especially as I've been traveling. My perspective on culture has shifted in my travels, and it's become more Sowellian, I suppose. Not Orwellian, Sowellian, in the sense that there are the differences that we see in the world between different ethnic groups, I think, can largely be explained, if not completely, by cultural differences, by differences in people's beliefs. Ideas affect actions, in behavior affects your actions, your behavior affect your socioeconomic status, how you engage with people in the world. And so if you have groups of people that have differing belief systems, you're going to see that manifested in different socioeconomic situations. And I've definitely seen that in my travels. I saw it in New Zealand, saw it in Japan, I see it in Thailand. And there's a hierarchy too. But given a particular value system, there is a hierarchy of good beliefs and bad beliefs. So for example, if you value peace and prosperity, or if you value cleanliness, or if you value whatever your value is, then there is a cultural value or cultural belief that is good or bad. If you value cleanliness, then you will find Thailand gross and kind of dirty and stinky, because it is. If you value cleanliness, and I think that's because people's belief systems they have different value systems. If you go to Japan, you'll find it's very clean, very neat and tidy. And that's because they have different belief systems there. So that has been my experience. Okay, another question. In that vein, how do you define race versus culture? Is it helpful to do so when speaking of radical individualism? Excellent question. I have taken a very simplistic, I'm finding, definition of race, because my definition of race has pretty much forever has not included culture at all. It's been 100% biology. I thought growing up that what racism was a claim about biology, and so my beliefs have been, there are some cultures are superior and inferior based on their belief systems, based on my value system. But now I'm finding people say, oh, that's racist. I say, wait, what? This has nothing to do with biology. People say, oh no, but part of race is culture. I don't know when that switch happened. I missed that memo. I don't think that's correct at all. So I think it's helpful, just like to delineate between sex and gender, to delineate between race and culture, I think is very, 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 very helpful, especially when we talk about things like racism. If you can't say that particular beliefs and actions are inferior or superior based on a value system, because that's racism, that's a problem with your definition of race. It totally devalues the meaning of the word racism, I think. All right, so other questions? Somebody says you should be on the Rubin report. Thanks. I actually hope that will happen. I'm a massive, massive fan of Dave Rubin. Just in the past, I don't know, a few months since I discovered him, I think he's the best thing since sliced bread. So hopefully I'll have a connection with him in the future. All right. last call for questions. This has been great. Thanks everybody for attending. I'll give it, so I've got a timer here. I'm going to give it 30 more seconds, and then we will call it an evening. Nothing about math or logic? Nothing about pi? You guys don't want to know? Pi is finite? My pleasure. Thanks for attending. All right, 10 seconds. Thanks, guys. It has been fun. I intend to do these every quarter, or maybe even more often than that. This is always great. Love engaging with you guys. And if you've got any additional questions, feel free to send me an email or write some comments on this YouTube video, and we'll get around and have a conversation. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a spectacular evening.